Hey guys, how you doing today? This is your therapist, Dempsey Darrell Spears, D. Darrell, as most people may know me, your YouTube therapist, your black therapist, red pill therapist, aka the Godfather in other sectors. Uh, I am going to talk about my concern about the increase in black male suicide today. When I first began my journey into mental health, black people as a whole, and also within our culture, have a very, very negative perspective of suicide. And we also, not only is it negative, but we also look at it as a sign of weakness. And it basically stems from our religious beliefs. And historically, in this country, black people committing suicide was almost non existent for years. Once we integrated into what was called mainstream American society and the influence of the people who control this country, those suicide rates began to increase. But even though they increased, they were always at very, very low levels. Most of the clients that I have treated that had suicidal thoughts or ideations. Now, when I talk about suicide ideations, I want you all to understand in that process that there's an assessment aspect of you understanding the difference between someone just merely having ideas and those who actually follow through. And that difference comprises of the fact of what a person is repetitively thinking and feeling and how they're functioning and the use of appraisals or assessments to ascertain the probability of one attempting to hurt themselves. In most situations, particularly with females of any race, but particularly of the dominant culture, particularly white females, many of those attempts were superficial. Also, we want to understand the type of mental health diagnoses that run parallel to those who attempt to commit suicide. For instance, the majority of people who commit suicide have some form of clinical depression or what we would call major depressive disorder. Depressive disorder is pretty much an illness that comprises of a person's inability to cope, and in the process of their inability to cope, there is a lowering or a low mood, I would say, in which a person thinks very negative. Their movements are lethargic. There may be symptomatic of overeating or not eating, oversleeping or not sleeping. There may be somewhat of a slight decrease in their level to be concerned with their physical appearance, their hygiene. You have thinking of life as being hopeless or helpless. You think about death and dying. You think about yourself not being as useful. The large percentage of people who have suicidal thoughts, they have some level of depression most of the time, not all the time. And various research articles can support that, give or take percentages. But also in that, it is also important to understand that if they have any type of mood disorder, because also you could find that in someone who has bipolar disorder, you could equally find similarities. Also, the matter is that there are also personality disorders that may run comorbid and also anxiety disorders that run comorbid to these types of illnesses. But when we relate to black male suicide, the first within the black male um demographic, I want to first point out the high suicidal rate for African American men who are part of the LGBT community. There is a large percentage of black men who are of the LGBT community, whether they are open or they're in the closet, have a high level of suicidal thoughts, suicidal attempts, and the fact that now, because of the rise in rates, they are actually becoming successful in ending their lives. And we must understand the dynamics that contribute to African American men in 2023 or in this generation of following through. Not just in the LGBT community, because that's like the highest, because the LGBT community has as a whole has a high rate of suicide, but also the fact that they also have a high percentage of substance abuse that is related to that. They also have a high level of diagnosed and undiagnosed mental illness. Black men are least likely than any other group of people, or any group, well, most groups per se, as it compares to white, black, and Hispanic, to engage in therapy and receive treatment. And in my opinion, that is the most important reason that translates to why there's an increase in black men committing suicide. Because if they were seeking the proper pharmacological treatment along with therapy, it would greatly reduce that. But because we're the most likely, period, due to our historical treatment and the fact that in the black community, even though there has been much gains in black people conforming to the usage of therapy, for the most part, it's still seen somewhat taboo, although there has been huge increases in the African American community seeking these services. So we're talking about the LGBT community, we're talking about mental illness, we're talking about substance abuse. But also we have to also focus on the fact of the lack of wanting to seek the proper services, or the fact that you feel that you don't need it. These are major contributors. Not seeking the proper treatment is, to me, the glaring evidence of why these attempts are even made in the first place. And that's why on this channel I talk a lot, even though I talk about the black community and I talk about other communities, but I make it a purpose as a black man who works in mental health and that has a low percentage of black men working mental health as professional therapists or psychologists, social workers, and etc. It is incumbent upon me to produce psychoeducational level content that reinforces the fundamental benefits of receiving these services. So this increase will continue to occur based on the lack of treatment, based on the lack of providing support. Because this is not indicative of black men as a whole historically. Because we went from an extreme low percentage to now we're approaching percentages that are on a schedule to reach what Caucasian males or Hispanics and other groups attempt. Suicide attempts can be very high in the Asian community also. But so when they say, and you see research that says that black male suicide rates are increasing by, let's say, 115, 125%, the reason why that percentage in itself is somewhat now I'm not going to say skewed, but it is misleading because it's coming from a perspective in which black male suicide was once almost unheard of, or it was very, very low. So even though it's increasing by 100+%, which is not a good trajectory, however, it is still somewhat mild to moderate levels. But see, there's a trend. It's reaching that, and then it's going to be at an extreme level. Then it's going to become a problem. And that's what we want to stop. And so my suggestion is that for families who are listening, I'm going to identify several telltale signs, such as if you notice that a black man is not functioning typically the way he once did, you notice that there's a extreme decrease in physical activity. If you notice things such as drinking, engaging in dangerous behaviors, risky behaviors, if you notice a person feeling like they are helpless or hopeless in life, if you're noticing a lack of hygiene upkeep, even anger, if you're noticing that a person is not communicating like they once were to everybody in their family, and they're isolating themselves, these are telltale signs. I'm sorry. These are telltale signs. The difference between when black men or men in general and women is that men use more violent means to get the job done. Women are more prone to more superficial means, lightly cutting themselves on the arm or taking pills but not enough to do the job. Men basically are more prone to using guns, more prone to physically harming themselves or hanging themselves in the process. So I just want us to be aware, even though the trend is extremely high percentage wise, it's coming from a background in which our suicide rates were always the lowest in the country. So I just want us to keep that in mind. This is not a means of panicking, but it is a means of being concerned. Because if we continue this upward trend, then we're going to be in the top 2 or 3, and then it's going to be of detriment to the community. So again, guys, I want to thank you all. This is D. Darrell Spears. Have a great day.